A new bill in Congress could require the Commerce Department to conduct data localization assessments. Federal News Network reports the SHIELD Act would focus on studying the impacts of e-commerce, data sharing, and data flow on the economy. Erol Yayboke is Director and Senior Fellow for the Project on Fragility and Mobility at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's writing about data localization and national security for CSIS. Thanks for joining me, Erol. Let's start by talking about what data localization is and these national security concerns that you're outlining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a good question and one that I get a lot because it's a little bit of a wonky term. Basically, what we mean by data localization is policies or mandates that require certain data related to citizens or residents of a country to be physically stored. So physically stored in infrastructure within a country's borders. And so imagine, I'm sitting in DC and imagine I tweet out something. So Twitter is a US based company saying, look, Ma, I'm on TV. And that is going to be sort of the genesis of that is in the United States. It's housed in a US based company. But let's say I'm doing that in India. I'm tweeting that in India. And if their laws that they're trying to pass right now are successful, that'll mean that, sure, it may be accessible to everyone globally, but the actual data that I am putting into the system that's about me, that's generated while I am physically in India, can actually stay in India and not actually be kept out of the country. And so that's where some of the concerns come in.
And it seems that this has been treated more as an economic issue, but that you see some real national security concerns. Can you explain that a little bit?
Definitely. So the term national security gets thrown around a lot in the data security world. It's usually, this is bad for business and there's some national security concerns. And so that really wasn't ever really well defined. And so my co-authors and I thought that there was an opportunity to write something and do some analysis about what we think the real national security concerns are. And so when we think about arguments for data localization mandates, so for controlling the cross-border flow of data more, you think about, I'm not sure that it's a good idea for, US citizen data to be housed only in China and therefore be accessible to the Chinese Communist Party whenever they want it. I can see that being a pretty valid, not only commercial concern, but also given who the citizens are or who they could be, also a national security concern. There's also legitimate reasons why law enforcement agencies might desire access to data and sort of want to restrict data flows to bad actors. So, people planning attacks that may be in the United States, trying to communicate with those outside of the United States. There may be a reason why we would want to control some of those. But honestly, the arguments are more that we found are more actually in the against column than they are in the for column. And so I'm happy to go into some of those arguments against.
Well, let's start by talking about how has the U.S. responded to this historically, and maybe how should they respond to this to handle those arguments?
So historically, as you mentioned, this has really been in the commercial space. And so we have dealt with this through trade agreements. We have responded to mandates that other countries have put on US-based countries through trade and diplomacy and things like that. And I think what we're worried about and what we're seeing is that that's not going to be enough going forward in an era of increased cyber attacks and an era of sort of increased geopolitical competition where data is money and data is power. We're going to need a little bit more of a robust set of tools against these data localization mandates.
Where should that come from in the government, do you think? There's obviously, it seems like it touches a number of issues.
It does, and it's worth talking about what some of our fears are first, perhaps, and then talk about what we can do about it. And so we're really worried about the other countries. Sort of these mandates are introducing greater risk and complexity to cybersecurity. So let's say I'm doing that tweeting in India or in Russia, and there's data localization mandates there. Well, those companies are going to have more people and more data physical infrastructure in different countries. And that is, people are vulnerable, and things like ransomware attacks and other things that we're seeing a lot now are getting in through people in addition to directly the systems themselves. And so the more people you have, the more vulnerability you have. That's the first one. And I think I mentioned law enforcement and sort of collaboration between law enforcement before, but data localization can actually limit collaboration between military, law enforcement, intel, and other security actors. It's already complicated enough for law enforcement in the United States to coordinate and share data with law enforcement in friendly countries. And if you erect more data localization mandates, that becomes more challenging. And the last thing that we're concerned about is that data localization is really being used as a tool of digital authoritarianism. And so countries are saying, oh, we want to protect our national security. But when you pull that onion a couple layers back, it's really about controlling the citizenry. And so to your question, I think that this is a diplomatic challenge. I think it's certainly a national security challenge that the Department of Defense and the various intelligence-focused agencies within the U.S. government are increasingly going to have to grapple with.
Lots to discuss there. Thanks so much, Erol.